The rushing waters of Devil's Canyon had claimed many lives, but on that fateful morning in 1883, they nearly claimed someone whose death would have ignited a war across the entire Southwest. When ranch foreman Jake Morrison spotted a young Apache boy struggling against the violent current, he faced a choice that would test everything he believed about courage and consequence. Jake's desperate rescue attempt would set in motion events that would bring 50 painted warriors to his doorstep at dusk. Not for revenge, but for a purpose that would challenge everything the frontier had taught him about honor, survival, and the unexpected bonds that can form between sworn enemies. Chapter 1. The Raging Waters. The morning sun cast long shadows across Devil's Canyon as Jake Morrison guided his horse along the treacherous rim trail, the sound of rushing water echoing from the depths below. Spring runoff had transformed the normally placid stream into a raging torrent that carved its way through the red sandstone with relentless fury. At 28, Jake had served as foreman of the Broken Arrow Ranch for 3 years, and he knew these waters claimed lives every season when unwary travelers underestimated their deadly power. Jake was checking the canyon crossing for damaged fence posts when movement in the churning waters caught his attention. His weathered hands tightened on the reins as he peered down at what appeared to be debris caught in the current, but the irregular motion suggested something far more alarming. Through the spray and foam, he glimpsed the desperate thrashing of someone fighting against the merciless flow. A young Apache boy, no more than 10 years old, struggled frantically in the middle of the swollen stream. The child's small arms beat against the water with failing strength, while the current dragged him inexorably toward a series of jagged rocks that would crush anyone swept into their embrace. The boy's head disappeared beneath the surface for terrifying seconds before bobbing up again, his mouth gasping for air between waves. Jake's military instincts from his cavalry days kicked in as he assessed the deadly situation with cold precision. The banks were too steep for a direct rescue, and the current too violent for his horse to survive the crossing. The smart choice would be to ride hard for help, but the boy would be dead long before assistance could arrive from the ranch or town. Without hesitation, Jake spurred his mount toward a fallen cottonwood that bridged part of the canyon. He dismounted at a dead run, stripping off his heavy jacket and boots while calculating the trajectory needed to reach the drowning child. The water below was ice cold from mountain snowmelt, and its temperature alone could kill a man within minutes, even if he avoided the rocks. Jake dove from a makeshift bridge with the precision of someone who had faced death before and refused to let fear control his actions. The shocking cold of Devil's Canyon's waters hit him like a physical blow, but he fought through the numbing sensation to locate the boy in the churning chaos. Time was running out for both of them, and Jake knew that his next few seconds would determine whether this rescue attempt would save a life or claim 2 more victims for the canyon's deadly reputation. Chapter 2. Marks of Nobility. Jake's lungs burned as he broke the surface, his arms wrapped around the unconscious Apache boy he had pulled from Devil's Canyon's merciless grip. The current had swept them nearly a quarter-mile downstream before Jake managed to fight his way to a rocky outcropping where they could escape the water's deadly embrace. Both of them lay gasping on the sun-warmed stone, the boy's lips blue from cold and lack of oxygen. Working quickly, Jake rolled the child on his side and pressed firmly on his back, forcing the river water from his lungs. The boy coughed violently, expelling the liquid that had nearly claimed his life, before drawing in desperate gulps of desert air. His dark eyes flickered open, filled with confusion and terror as he found himself face to face with a white stranger in this remote canyon. As Jake checked the boy for injuries, he noticed details that made his breath catch in his throat. The child's clothing, though soaked and torn from his ordeal, displayed intricate beadwork and silver ornaments that spoke of high status within Apache society. More significant still was the medicine bundle secured around his neck. Not the simple leather pouch of a common tribal member, but an elaborately decorated artifact featuring turquoise, eagle feathers, and symbols that Jake recognized from his military service. The boy's physical appearance reinforced Jake's growing realization of what he had rescued from the waters. Despite his youth and current vulnerability, the child carried himself with an innate dignity that suggested leadership training from birth. Even in his frightened state, he maintained a composure that spoke of noble bloodline and careful upbringing in the traditions of Apache nobility. Jake's years of frontier experience had taught him to read the subtle indicators of tribal hierarchy. The quality of craftsmanship in the boy's clothing represented the finest artistry the Apache people could produce, reserved for the children of chiefs and war leaders. The ritual scars barely visible on the boy's arms marked him as someone whose capture or death could provoke responses that would echo across the entire territory. As the child's breathing steadied and color returned to his face, Jake found himself studying features that seemed oddly familiar. Something about the boy's appearance stirred memories from his cavalry days that he couldn't quite bring into focus, creating an uncomfortable sense that this encounter was not the random meeting it appeared to be. The feeling was strong enough to suggest that fate had orchestrated this rescue for purposes neither of them yet understood. Chapter 3: Gathering Storm. Jake wrapped the shivering boy in his own dry shirt while building a small fire to combat the dangerous effects of prolonged cold exposure. As warmth returned to the child's body, he began to speak in halting but clear English, revealing an education that confirmed Jake's suspicions about his elevated status. The boy introduced himself as Running Bear, son of Chief Thundercloud of the Chiricahua Apache, one of the most respected and feared war leaders in the entire Southwest. The implications of this revelation struck Jake like a physical blow. Thundercloud commanded hundreds of warriors across multiple bands, his influence extending from the Mexican border to the Colorado River. The chief's youngest son disappearing in Devil's Canyon would trigger a massive search effort that could easily be interpreted as a hostile movement by nervous territorial authorities. Jake realized he was holding a piece of human dynamite that could explode into full-scale warfare if handled incorrectly. Running Bear explained through chattering teeth that he had been returning from a vision quest, a sacred journey undertaken by young Apache nobles to discover their spiritual destiny. The flash flood had caught him while crossing what should have been a shallow stream, transforming his passage from routine travel into a life-threatening ordeal. His survival carried spiritual significance that would resonate throughout Apache society, especially given the identity of his rescuer. As Jake helped the boy toward his horse, he noticed other riders approaching along the canyon rim. 3 Apache scouts materialized from the landscape with the supernatural stealth their people were famous for, their painted faces and armed readiness, suggesting they were part of a larger search party. These warriors had been tracking Running Bear's trail and would have found only his body without Jake's intervention. The lead scout, a weathered man with the bearing of a veteran warrior, studied Jake with eyes that missed nothing. His gaze took in the wet clothes, the improvised fire, and most importantly, the fact that Running Bear was alive and unharmed in the company of a white man. The warrior's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts, but Jake could sense the careful evaluation taking place. Within hours, word of the rescue would reach Thundercloud himself, carried by these scouts across the desert with the speed that only Apache communication networks could achieve. Jake understood that his actions had set forces in motion that would culminate in a reckoning he could neither predict nor prevent. The question was whether that reckoning would bring gratitude or suspicion from one of the most powerful men in the territory. Chapter 4: 50 Warriors at Dusk. The amber light of approaching dusk painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson as Jake Morrison stood on the porch of his modest ranch house, watching the horizon with growing unease. Word had spread quickly through the territory about his rescue of Running Bear, carried by Apache scouts whose communication network rivaled the telegraph in its speed and efficiency. Now, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Jake sensed that the consequences of his actions were about to arrive. The first sign was the complete absence of wildlife, sounds that normally filled the evening air. No coyotes called from the distant hills, no birds chirped in the cottonwoods along the creek, and even the insects seemed to have fallen silent. This unnatural quiet was a warning that experienced frontiersmen learned to recognize. the presence of Apache warriors moving through the landscape with supernatural stealth. Jake's trained eye caught movement on the ridge overlooking his property, dark figures materializing against the sunset like phantoms emerging from the desert itself. One by one, mounted warriors appeared along the skyline, their silhouettes creating an intimidating display of organized force. The riders spread out in a precise formation that spoke of military discipline and tactical expertise, effectively surrounding Jake's ranch with overwhelming numbers. As the last rays of sunlight faded into purple twilight, Jake counted exactly 50 warriors positioned on the high ground around his property. Each man sat motionless on his painted horse, weapons visible but not immediately threatening, creating an atmosphere of controlled tension that made the evening air feel electric with potential violence. These were not random raiders or desperate renegades, but elite fighters under the command of someone with absolute authority. The central figure emerged from the gathering darkness like a force of nature made manifest. Chief Thundercloud rode down from the ridge with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding both respect and fear across hundreds of miles of desert territory. Eagle feathers adorned his graying hair, and his weathered face bore the scars of countless battles fought in defense of his people. War paint decorated his features in patterns that Jake recognized as symbols of high ceremony rather than immediate combat. Thundercloud approached Jake's porch alone, dismounting with fluid grace despite his apparent age. His dark eyes studied Jake with an intensity that seemed to penetrate straight through to his soul, evaluating not just his immediate intentions, but his fundamental character. The chief's presence commanded the complete attention of every warrior on the surrounding ridges, their loyalty evident in their disciplined silence. The moment had arrived for Jake to learn whether his rescue of Running Bear would be met with gratitude or suspicion from one of the most powerful men in the Southwest. Chapter 5. The Test of Character. Thundercloud spoke in accented but precise English, his voice carrying the formal weight of someone conducting official business between nations. The chief began by acknowledging Jake's courage in risking his life to save Running Bear, a debt that could never be fully repaid according to Apache tradition. However, his words carried an undertone that suggested this meeting involved far more than simple gratitude for a heroic rescue. The Apache leader reached into his leather pouch and withdrew an object that made Jake's blood run cold. A military button bearing the insignia of the 7th Cavalry Regiment, tarnished with age, but unmistakably from Jake's old uniform. Thundercloud explained how he had recovered this memento from a battlefield 3 years earlier, during a skirmish near the Mexican border where Jake's patrol had been ambushed by renegade Apache warriors who had broken from tribal authority. Jake's memories flooded back with stunning clarity as Thundercloud recounted details that only someone present during that battle could have known. The chief described how Jake had risked court-martial by refusing orders to pursue fleeing Apache women and children in his sacred burial grounds, choosing instead to tend wounded soldiers while letting the non-combatants escape. That act of conscience had been witnessed by Thundercloud himself, who had been tracking the renegades to bring them back under tribal justice. More shocking still, Thundercloud revealed that Jake's commanding officer had deliberately sent the patrol into Apache territory without adequate support, hoping to provoke an incident that would justify increased military action against the tribes. The ambush had been orchestrated by corrupt officials working with unscrupulous land speculators who wanted Apache territory open for development. Jake's survival and his refusal to follow illegal orders had disrupted carefully laid plans for profitable warfare. Thundercloud's proposal was as unexpected as his revelations had been disturbing. The Apache people needed allies who understood both worlds, individuals who could navigate the treacherous political landscape that threatened to destroy tribal lands through systematic corruption and manufactured conflicts. Jake's actions, both past and present, had proven his character in ways that transcended cultural boundaries and military loyalties. The chief offered Jake a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could return to his quiet existence as a ranch foreman, content in knowing he had done the right thing in moments of crisis, Or he could accept a role as a secret mediator between two worlds, working to expose the corruption that threatened both Apache and settler communities while helping to forge genuine peace rather than profitable warfare that served only private interests. Chapter 6: Brotherhood Forged. Jake stood in the gathering darkness, weighing Thundercloud's proposal against everything he had built since leaving military service behind. The quiet life he had constructed on the frontier represented safety and predictability, but it also meant turning away from a chance to address the systematic injustices that had shaped his experiences as a soldier. The corruption Thundercloud described explained so many of the senseless orders and tragic outcomes that had haunted Jake's conscience for years. Thundercloud's network operated through carefully placed individuals who could move between Apache and settler communities without arousing suspicion from either side. They gathered intelligence about corrupt officials, documented illegal land seizures, and worked to prevent manufactured conflicts that served private interests rather than genuine security needs. Jake's background as both a former cavalry officer and current ranch foreman made him uniquely valuable to such an organization, providing access to information that could save countless lives. The decision crystallized as Jake thought about Running Bear and the countless other innocent people caught between competing forces they could neither understand nor control. His intervention at Devil's Canyon had been instinctive, driven by basic human decency rather than calculated strategy. But accepting Thundercloud's proposal would be a conscious choice to stand against the systems that created such desperate situations for both communities. Thundercloud explained the practical aspects of their alliance with the precision of a military commander, outlining a campaign strategy. Jake would continue his work at the Broken Arrow Ranch, using his position to monitor territorial politics and military movements while maintaining contact with Apache scouts through established communication networks. Information would flow in both directions, allowing tribal leaders to avoid confrontations while helping honest officials identify the corrupt elements within their own ranks. The personal cost would be significant: constant danger from discovery, perpetual secrecy about his true activities, and the knowledge that exposure would mean death not just for himself, but for everyone connected to the network. Jake would be walking a tightrope between two worlds, trusted by neither side completely, while working to serve the interests of justice rather than profit or political advancement. Thundercloud's next revelation added a personal dimension that made Jake's choice even more compelling. Running Bear had been returning from a vision quest that had revealed his destiny as a future peacemaker between the Apache people and the encroaching American civilization. The boy's rescue from Devil's Canyon represented the fulfillment of a prophecy that spoke of salvation coming from an unexpected source, setting the stage for a new kind of relationship between former enemies. Jake extended his hand to Thundercloud, accepting the alliance that would transform him from an isolated ranch foreman into an active agent for justice on behalf of both communities. The Apache chief's firm grip sealed more than an agreement between individuals. It forged a partnership between former enemies who had chosen cooperation over the endless cycle of retaliation and mistrust that had defined frontier relations for decades. Thundercloud and his 50 warriors departed as quietly as they had arrived, melting back into the desert landscape with the supernatural stealth that made Apache fighters legendary throughout the Southwest. Jake stood alone on his porch, watching the last traces of their presence disappear into the night while contemplating the weight of his new responsibilities. The corrupt officials who had orchestrated conflicts between Apache and settler communities would discover that their plans had created the very alliance they had sought to prevent. Jake's rescue of one Apache child had evolved into something far greater: a commitment to protecting all the innocent caught in the crossfire of a war fueled by greed rather than genuine grievances between peoples who had more in common than their leaders wanted them to realize. As stars emerged in the clear desert sky above his ranch, Jake Morrison began planning his new life as a guardian between worlds, knowing that the boy he had saved from the raging waters of Devil's Canyon had ultimately saved him from a meaningless existence. The true victory lay not in the physical rescue, but in the choice to transform personal courage into lasting change that would benefit both the Apache people and the honest settlers who sought to build lives based on justice rather than exploitation. If this tale of courage and unexpected alliances captivated you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories from the Old West. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done at Devil's Canyon. These forgotten heroes shaped the frontier we know today.